Welcome back to the Strength and Speed Podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner Evan Preparis. We have a guest with us on the line. It's going to be a pretty interesting episode. Before we get to him, though, a quick word from our sponsors. So this episode is brought to you by two sponsors of the Conquer the Gauntlet Pro Team. One of them is OOFOS. You may have heard me talk about OOFOS before. They're recovery sandals. So they're essentially sandals, clogs, shoes that reduce impact by up to 37%. So great for post-ultra-ocr or kind of just nursing an injury if on the lower extremity. Highly recommend them, or if you just kind of stand on your feet all day. So highly recommend those. And then on top of that, another sponsor of the Conquer the Gauntlet Pro Team, Rock Tape, make all sorts of mobility and kinesiology tape and topical cream like Rock Sauce Fire and Rock Sauce Ice. We're going to be talking a lot about KT tape on this podcast, so we'll kind of get into some of that stuff later. But let's get into our guest. So joining me, I have Dr. Kirk Iodice. He runs Advanced Healthcare and Sports. It's a clinic in the southern portion of Kansas City, specifically Olathe area. And he's got a ton of certifications. I'm going to kind of blow through some of them real quick. So official chiropractor for the Kansas City T-Bones, official chiropractor for the KC Smoke Elite Running Club, Cleveland Chiropractic College faculty, recommended physician, KC Ballet and Runner's Edge, former official chiropractor of Kansas City Wizards, Doctor of Chiropractic, Bachelor of Sciences in Health and Fitness, Bachelor of Science in Life Science, Active Release Technique Certified, Motion Palpation Institute Certified, Kinesio Taping Level 3 Certified. So Kirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Evan. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, and then also another fun fact, kind of scrolling through your bio, you were born in West Islip, New York. I'm from Long Island. So.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
It's a small world, man.
Yeah, what's funny is I didn't realize that when I came to see you a couple weeks ago. So
yeah, that's awesome, man.
Cool. So yeah, let's, so I think some people listening to this, we are generally Midwest-based Strength and Speed, but we do have members nationwide. So if you're not from the Kansas City area, I wouldn't worry, because I think a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about and we're going to learn during this episode can be applied nationwide. There's other institutes and places around the nation that provide similar services.
And it's a common question we get as well from people either who are moving, their current patients are moving somewhere else, or they say, hey, my mom lives in Minnesota or something like that. And they'll say, can you help me find someone? So I can give some pointers on certifications to look for someone who would have similar training as me. Awesome.
So I guess let's jump right into it. Methods and modalities do you provide for people and kind of the general purpose?
So I like to reduce their simplest elements to make them easy to understand. So when it comes down to it, I really just do three things in my office. It's very simple, which is that I release tight or injured soft tissues. I loosen stiff joints, and I show people and help them to strengthen weak muscles. So everything that I do or someone like me does is going to fall approximately into one of those categories. So then you start branching out into, okay, so and you had mentioned a few of the different treatments that we provide. What are those? What are each of those for? So most people who have been to a chiropractor have probably been adjusted in some way. And the simplest way that I can communicate what an adjustment does is that an adjustment is to a joint as a stretch is to a muscle. In other words, it's a structure that's meant to move. Otherwise, it would just be fused bones. So if it's made to move, it's lacking a range of motion. So you push it past the range of motion that is typically used. You do that repetitiously, and then with a little bit of time, the range of motion can be restored. Much in the same way as if you had tight hamstrings, you stretch them, which is moving it farther than you typically do. Do that repetitiously. You have looser hamstrings, and some of the problems that were associated with is helped. So that is a little different in that you can't stretch your own joints. You can do some things to mobilize them, but typically it takes an external force to be able to actually manipulate a joint. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the most common treatment that is, and that's usually the the focus of what your hands-on experience in school. So for chiropractors, it's one of the safer healthcare professions you can go to. One of the reasons for that is that to do the hands-on work that we have to do, we have to actually complete over 1,000 hands-on hours before we're permitted to go treat people out, in the real world, if you will. So that's a tremendous amount of time, one-on-one hands-on time and experience. And again, that primarily isn't adjusting. So then some people will specialize. And when you're treating athletes, you need to know a thing or two about soft tissue. So then we get into the, releasing injured or tight tissues. And a few of the modalities there, you mentioned ART. So ART it's a specialty certification. You actually have to go through a certification process and pass things like that. It's to be honest, it's the hardest one to do as a practitioner. It has the most information associated with it. So usually someone who's ART certified, even if they're doing treatments other than ART with you, is going to be pretty decent, or actually they're going to be really good, to be honest with you. So with ART, essentially you take a structure, you shorten it, you press on it, you stretch it, helps to release muscles or tissues that are tight and they don't want to release, or you can break up scar tissue. Then there's also the treatment commonly referred to as Graston or IASTM. Which of those are you more familiar with? IASTM?
IASTM, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, just for the listeners jumping back, ART, active release therapy, correct?
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Yep.
So IASTM, it's kind of a mouthful. So it stands for instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization. A lot of people will refer to it as Graston, which is kind of like a brand of that particular type of treatment. But with that, many people have had this in a lot of therapists' office. You have a metal instrument, you rub it over the skin. That's helpful for breaking up scar tissue and loosening up tight structures. And then you also have such as needling. Practitioners can't do dry needling in every state, but here in Kansas, Missouri, and some of the surrounding states, you can. Dry needling it's like the medical version of acupuncture. So it's very much so centered on musculoskeletal care, meaning it's for pain. It's not necessarily for Eastern medicine purposes of aligning energy, things like that, which there's nothing wrong with that, to be clear. I'm not saying that there's not incredible validity and you can't get incredible results with that, but this is very specialized version of acupuncture, if you will, that's really designed to get results with musculoskeletal care. So those are some of the main things that we utilize to accomplish those goals.
Awesome. Now I'd like to jump back a little bit. So you started off talking about adjustments, right? Let's say I know nothing about the body and I'm like, well, I crack my back every morning or I crack my neck every morning. Why can't I just do that? Why do I have to go see someone special?
And that's a great question. We definitely get that. So especially when it comes to your spine, think of your spine like a chain, right? If you can picture a chain on the ground. And if I welded some of the links of that chain together, if I kind of wiggled it along the ground, the whole thing kind of moves, but there are parts of it that are moving as one unit, 3 or 4 links in a row. Does that make sense? That kind of picture in your head? Your spine's kind of like that. So the thing is, when you are self-manipulating, cracking your neck or your back, what you're doing is you're making areas that already move too much move more. So generally speaking, you're encouraging areas of hypermobility, meaning excessive motion. And the areas that are hypomobile, meaning they don't move enough, they just get stiffer because those areas that are moving too much are making up for the slack that of them not moving. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. You become dependent on it. The thing is, it always feels good. When joints make that popping sound called a cavitation, that has a pain relieving effect to it. To such an extent that it feels good, and usually it can make you feel better when you do it. But it's very short-lived, and generally speaking, you have to do it more and more over time to get that same feeling. So the difference is that what chiropractors will do is find the areas that you're not moving enough, and we adjust those areas, and that helps areas that don't move enough move better.
Gotcha. Now, I remember growing up, and there was like an old wives' tale that cracking your knuckles was bad for you. Is there any validity to, that, or cracking joints being bad for you?
No, you can very, very much so say with a lot of confidence, no. There have been the surprising amount of studies and money spent on that exact question in the format that you're talking about in regard to people popping their own knuckles, to the extent where there's one where a gentleman popped his, one hand every day for 25 years, however many times a day, and the other hand he didn't. After 25 years, x-rayed both hands, absolutely no difference in the amount of arthritis. And then there are other studies that confirm over and over again that the popping noise and doing that does not enlarge joints. It doesn't have any negative consequences to it.
Gotcha. I had never heard of that study. I think that's fascinating. I love that he spent that long investigating.
I know,
that's amazing.
Is that not commitment, right?
Yeah, I'm very impressed.
I love what I do. I don't know if I'm, 25 years, doing the same thing every day, but that's impressive. I got to give that man credit.
Okay, now for adjustments specifically, is that something that a healthy person should do to maintain health, or is that specifically for, I'm injured and I'm coming in to see you for something specifically bothering me?
So it can be in either context. No matter how practice the people run, the majority of patients that are seeking care because they are hurt. There is a complaint. There's something they want a relief from. And then some people will choose to go on and get adjusted to kind of just stay optimized, just because they notice that they run better, they move better, they are healthier when they get adjusted. But it really comes down to the needs of the individual person. And I always look at healthcare dollars as ROI. You want to make sure that you get return on your investment, right? So some people that, especially athletes, they push their bodies, they see those results. They are more aware when not when they're hurt necessarily, which that can be true too, but they're also more aware when they're just not operating at their peak, right? And so with athletes, many times you find that that's a population that's particularly interested in keeping themselves feeling good without necessarily coming in for complaints on a regular basis. Sorry, it's a little bit of a long answer to the question, but does that answer it?
No, that's absolutely great. That was just what I was looking for. You have experience treating OCR athletes. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm always treating, at least a few people who are doing OCR. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we always like to give business back to the people who are essentially, self cycle there, supporting the sport and et cetera. So that's good to hear. And also it's good to hear because our sport is fairly unique. I mean, it requires a lot of planes of motion and different types of movements and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good too, because it encourages a lot of different motions. I mean, many of the injuries that are sustained in sports, they have that term overuse before the word injury, right? So overuse injuries tend to occur from doing the same motion repetitively over and over again. But when you have activities that break it up and have different motions involved, I see that as a really good and healthy thing.
Awesome. Now, let's say I go to your clinic and I'm completely healthy, or I'm injured, whatever. Take me through the process of, I show up, I walk in the door, like what goes on, what's the next step in treating me?
Sure. So the first step is, beyond like paperwork and all the normal doctor stuff, is to sit down and take a history and understand what the is looking for, because the reality is there's different types of care, kind of as we have alluded to. Most people they come in for a complaint, so we'll focus on that situation. You have to understand, okay, am I going to have to put you in crisis care, or are we going to try to create a treatment plan to fix you? In other words, somebody may come in, they say, "Doc, I heard that you're good at fixing this stuff. I have this big event. It's in 3 days. What can you do?" Right? That's crisis care. That's where you're going to be KT taped like the bionic woman or man. It's not going to be focusing on exercises and strengthening so much as some stretches. And then anything I can do that can have the most relief and results the fastest to get you through the event. So that's one particular goal set, and saying, okay, your goal is to get you through this. My goal is to accomplish your goal. Let's do that. Of course, as long as it's safe. The majority of people, it tends to be something they've had for a while and they're wanting to get this fixed. So in that case, what we do is kind of like what we did with you. We run through two different types of exams. So are you familiar with the term orthopedic exam?
No. Let's
okay.
run through it.
So orthopedic exam, if you've ever been to, either a medical doctor, orthopedist, chiropractor, physical therapist, basically they'll have you do tests where they push on you, you resist motions or something like that, and they're asking you if it hurts and where. The goal of orthopedic tests is to figure out the tissue of origin of your pain. In other words, what is the thing that is hurt? But then there's another part when it comes to treating athletes that is vitally important if you want to fix things versus just manage them, and that is functional exam. Are you familiar with that term?
Let's run through it anyway.
Sure. Okay. So functional exam is evaluating that exact term. So you're evaluating function. So in this case, you're looking for essentially areas that move well, areas that don't move so well. And if so, is it muscles that are too weak, muscles that are too tight? You're trying to figure out what movement patterns are not going correctly. And then usually what you can do, Evan, is you can take the functional exam findings and say, okay, you have decreased ankle mobility and decreased hip flexor mobility. And then couple that with the fact with, okay, your facet joints and your lumbar spine are hurting because you're getting overextended when you do your overhead motion in volleyball. So that's how you make the whole picture. And then that's how you can fix things, because muscles don't get tight for no reasons. Joints don't start, getting stiff for no reason at all. There's some dysfunction that's underlying that. And so then the treatment becomes, how do we create solutions in the short term where you get results? How do we help you self-manage and educate you to have it not come back? Then also, how do we create a treatment plan that enables you to change the function of your body so that it's not likely to come back? Or, obviously the hope is that that same thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I love that approach and kind of that holistic kind of looking at the whole body and all the different joints and actual movements. It just makes so much more sense. I'm in the Army, and sometimes you go to like the Army doctor and he's like, oh yeah, take some ibuprofen and don't run. And you're like, yeah, I need something better than just eat ibuprofen and not running, right? Like
this opinion a lot of times in with certain healthcare providers, and which is that some of these distance sports or running in particular is bad for you, and I have a problem with that, because if you look into the research of most of these activities, you'll see a ton of positive health benefits. For example, again, this is just maybe people not looking into statements they believe based on research. Like, there's a common consensus that that running, it tends to create arthritis in your knees. And the fact is, research points the opposite of that. Actually, people who run, they tend to have more incidence of soft tissue injury, but they actually have decreased incidence of lower extremity arthritis and decreased incidence of lower extremity disability as a group. So, it just goes to show you in that regard, it actually, you could make the argument it's actually good for your joints. Now, that's different than, I know, you're in the military, and if you're running with packs, things like that can accelerate, arthritis or things like that. I see people who were in for a long time, because you're carrying heavy weights.
Right.
You're running in boots that are not exactly, the best for doing distance.
They're terrible.
Yeah. So,
although I will say, like, starting in around 2004, when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan full bore, like, the shoe companies started really making, because essentially they wanted to make money, right? So Nike started making boots, Oakley started making boots, so the quality of boots after essentially the war on terror started increased dramatically. Okay. I mean, they're so much better.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and running with 70 pounds on your back, probably not the best for your joints.
I typically would make the distinction, but in your head you're probably thinking, man, there's times I'm running that didn't feel so hot in my knees or something like that. So that's that is a different situation with that. But just in terms of your standard, like, person jogging or running for fitness, right, you can make the argument it actually is good for your joints.
Yeah, I would. All the research I've seen completely agrees with that. That essentially the more running, it helps build bone density, right? Because you're exposing it to stress, and then you should be recovering at some point, which would make your bones denser, essentially, make you more resistant to injury.
That's right. The only caveat to that is with overtraining. So if you're over, kind of 60-ish miles a week total for your mileage with running, then you get into a high enough volume that, no matter what, if you do something at high enough volume or intensity, it can accelerate the rate of change.
And also assuming, obviously, your nutrition is appropriate for.
Yeah. There are several caveats to that, but you could say as a group,
right.
Right.
Cool. So I like to run through some of the treatments you provide specifically and kind of what they're best used for and stuff like that. So let's start off with active release therapy. So again, give us a quick rundown of active release therapy and kind of what it should be used for and what it maybe not so good to be used for.
Sure. with all these, it depends on somewhat on the proficiency of the provider, of course. Like someone could be really amazing at ART, not so good at other things. They may get slightly different results, right? But yeah, a lot of times there are specific things that these may be a little bit better for. So with ART, ART looks cool. I mean, so if I am, on the sidelines of a game, or if I'm helping runners after a race or something like that, if I'm treating people with ART, other people will come around just to see, because they're like, what are you doing? That looks really neat. Basically, you go with origin insertion of muscles, and it can go with other tissues too, ligaments and things like that. But basically, you're pulling along the line of a soft tissue. You shorten the structure, you press on it with your hands, and then the patient, either with their own power or the doctor helping them, they lengthen that. And so what happens there is that there's I think one of the easier ways that I'll communicate the benefits of this to people is it's kind of like combining a stretch and a massage at the same time, in that you're elongating a tissue. So let's say it was your triceps, right? So you would be stretching the triceps at the same time as there's manual pressure applied to there. So you have the pressure from your hands, kind of like massage, right? But then you also have the stretch as if it's a stretch, but it works better and faster than either one by itself. So in terms of what that works best for, you can use it. It has very broad applications, but generally speaking, since the purpose is to change length of something, if you have something that's shortened, something that's not moving well enough, like a muscle or a soft tissue, so it tends to help change the length or elongate shortened structures. And it also is good for altered mechanics caused from muscles being too tight. So a perfect example is the shoulder. I've got a video on my website, and a lot of people who do ART, they'll have something like this too. But there'll be somebody who comes in, they can't elevate their shoulder very well. You do minutes worth of treatment, 5 minutes worth of treatment, and then do the repeat video, and lo and behold, they can reach all the way overhead. So it's great for quick strike improvements in ranges of motion.
Gotcha. Sounds good. All right, let's jump into kind of the next one down the list. So instrument-assisted soft tissue mobility, IASTM, or Graston method, what you called earlier. Our sponsor, Rock Tape, does rock blades.
That's right.
Similar stuff there. So give us some information about that.
So this is generally it's going to be it's more superficial, right? So in other words, it's not going to go as deep. And that'd be a benefit of ARTs. You can get very deep in with your hands. If you take a metal instrument and push it really hard into someone, it's called stabbing. And people don't really like being stabbed, So it tends to be a more superficial treatment. So it technically is a fascial treatment. So ART is very specific. It's one of the reasons it's so difficult, is that, you're not just on a muscle. You might be on a specific part of a muscle. So very, very detailed, takes a lot of experience to feel. With the instrument, you're on the fascia, so you're over a region. You have to changes the way you think about how you're treating. You think about how fascial lines move, how a body moves, how a certain part of a person might be restricted. Particular benefit for doing instrument is for if there's large regions that are affected. Great example, I had a patient in who he previously had a disc injury in his back, and that can cause this thing called antalgia. Which is where you kind of get cockeyed a little bit, like your shoulders will be offset from your hips, like you're leaning over. And the thing is, he kind of got stuck like that, even after the disc injury was gone. And so his muscle has just kind of solidified him in this position. And so even though he no longer had this active back pain or disc disorder anymore, I used that along the connections of where fascia, which is the connective tissue under your skin, where that went from and to. I used my knowledge of that to figure out how I needed to kind of unravel him. And we were able to get him within, a couple of weeks to where he could stand completely straight. But I don't know, that would have been much harder. I probably could have accomplished that with other things, but it would have been harder because with this, I can cover large areas of connective tissue as we're treating. Also, it's for tendon injuries and ligament injuries too.
Yeah, and I remember, so the first time, I see these rock blades, a specific tool for this specific thing, and they look crazy. It looks like you're about to carve someone open on them. But I was actually...
Yeah, the rock blades look crazy.
Yeah, so when you actually did the Graston method to me, it wasn't I thought it was going to be more painful than it was. It wasn't. It was actually like, it was just like a little uncomfortable, but not. It didn't feel nice, but it didn't feel bad. It was just like, this could feel bad, but it doesn't. So.
One thing I hear really frequently, I'll tell them I'll describe what I'm going to do. And this happens with some frequency, is that they'll say, oh God, I've had that done before. And I'll say, describe your experience. And they will often have been to maybe a therapist's office or something like that. And they'll describe a lot of bruising and it sounds really, really intense, right? And sometimes that's where the reputation comes from, is, oh gosh, this is really intense and hard treatment. Now, don't be wrong. There are times where for specific situations, which there's a pep talk beforehand, where it is going to be heavy pressure. It is going to be really painful, so on and so forth. But the vast majority of the time, you don't have to do that. And in fact, it's contraindicated. You're supposed to use a mild to moderate amount of pressure because, again, it's superficial. It's meant to be on or just below the skin pretty much. But what happens is that one person, maybe in like a large physical therapy clinic, something like that, or it could be other types of therapists or treatment providers too. But one person might go get educated and take a class, buy the instruments, bring them back for everyone to use. And they say, well, how to use them? They're like, oh, you just put this lotion on people and you scrape them, right? But just like anything else, you do have to be specifically educated on how to do it correctly. It's just a tool. It's just an instrument, and it takes the training of the person to make it something that's therapeutic.
Gotcha. Good explanation. Now, look, continuing kind of moving along down the list, let's talk dry needling.
Sure.
When people hear dry needling, like you kind of mentioned earlier, they immediately think acupuncture, and they think of someone laying on the table with like 30 pins stuck in their body. And I know that's not the case. So kind of take us through what the process is and specifically, go from there.
So there are different types of dry needling, actually. So the one that, if there's anyone listening to this right now who had it as a result of a sports injury, for example, there's a good chance they've had trigger point dry needling, which in trigger point dry needling, and there's different ways of classifying this, but the way I'm communicating is how I tell patients. I think it's the easiest to understand. So in trigger point dry needling, essentially you're looking for this thing called a trigger point. Which have you heard of that term before? Do you think people are familiar with that at all? Trigger point?
I've heard it, and we talked about this very, very briefly for podcast listeners who've been around for about 2 years, because I had torn my pec 2 years ago, and I actually had dry needling, which is the first time I'd even heard of it when the doctor who I was with started like, yeah, I'm going to stick these needles into your pec, and I was like, okay, cool.
Not scary at all, right?
So I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of interested in this stuff. So he's like, most people look away, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to stare at you while I'm going to look at it because I want to see what's going on. But yeah. Run through trigger point and all that stuff.
Sure. I want to make sure I'm not going into too much detail. I nerd out on this stuff, so it's easy to go get people glass-eyed,
Yeah, but I'm pretty nerdy, so I feel like if people are still listening to my podcast, they have a little bit of nerd in them too. So.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear. All right. So a trigger point, the easiest way I can describe what a trigger point is it's an area within a muscle. So if you picture a muscle like a rope, there's strands, right? All these individual strands. And in a muscle, those strands contract. So when really this thing happens in your muscle with some ions, creates an electrical discharge, and basically you have a shortening of these structures. And so like when you flex your bicep, it's actually those fibers have shortened, right? So we can think of that as flexing. And then if I don't do that, that's relaxing, right? So a trigger point is an area within that muscle. It's not the whole muscle. It's some of those strands. If you can picture that rope, some of those strands are tighter than the other areas, and they're always just on the verge of contracting. So there's these processes that happen to a muscle that cause it to flex, basically. And in a trigger point, it's kind of amped up, and they're always just about to happen, but not quite. So it makes this balled up area of a muscle, and it makes it kind of reactive. So if you take your fingers, and if you could see me do this to somebody, so if you were looking at me from the outside and watching me evaluate someone, I can take my fingers and kind of pluck across a muscle. You'll actually flex involuntarily and contract. It's not them, they can't help it. It's involuntary contraction. And I can feel the texture of it. So that's a trigger point. So in trigger point dry needling, you take a needle, you place it into that spot. And the hardest thing about this particular type is isolating that spot, because you're talking a very small area within a large muscle very often. But you take the needle, it pierces that area, and really the needle acts as a stimulus. Now, obviously, there are some issues in terms of it's being pierced, right? So you get some blood flow in there, some other things, but really it causes an involuntary contraction, and it makes that area finally fully flex, and then it relaxes. So the way it was described to me is it's kind of like rebooting a computer. So when you reboot a computer, that it just kind of takes care of a lot of the glitches. Kind of the same thing here, and in this case, the muscle essentially, it has input from its neighbors and says, well, okay, well, how tight are you? And you can have very quick results with getting rid of those. So that's one type. The other type I generally will refer to as neurologic dry needling. So that one looks a lot more like acupuncture. So you have more needles. They tend to be manipulated. In the previous one I was talking about, you'll actually move the needle back and forth. In the neurologic dry needling, you tend to leave them in, and they tend to be both near an area that you're symptomatic as well as in areas that are seemingly unrelated. And the reason that you do those and choose those distributions is based on essentially what you found going wrong and the nerves that are involved with that particular dysfunction.
Gotcha. So dry needling, we're talking how many needles?
That's the question of the hour. So in the trigger point dry needling, very often just one. And let's think here. I had one last week, a calf strain, which is a very common area. We'll do that on acute calf strain. One treatment, they were back to running. That was a single needle in a single spot, probably 30 seconds worth of treatment, which is the good news. The bad news is it's a long 30 seconds. So that type is very painful. When it comes to the other type, in terms of numbers, it depends on the condition. Figure on average, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of, 6 to 12, something like that. Could be less, could be more, depending on what's going on. For example, there are sometimes in someone's heel where they'll basically like almost get a bone bruise on their heel, and I might put 15 needles in, a surface area the size of a dime.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. So not the same army doctors, right? There's like big army doctors who are usually, they're used to dealing with the masses, but specifically within special forces, we hire like a private company to do a lot of the things you're talking about to the operators. So they are phenomenal. They're run by a company called S3E28, which it's an acronym. I can't remember what it stands for, but they were the ones who did dry needling to me after I tore my pec. Personally, I didn't feel like I made a huge it felt good when they actually hit the trigger point, but I didn't feel like a huge difference afterwards. But I know from talking to some of my friends that have had it done, they reported, like you were saying, kind of immediate results and immediate progress from the situation. So I just thought it was really cool.
You bring up a really good topic, actually, which is kind of inadvertently, but there are these different treatments I would exist. Well, the thing is, you can have soft tissues injured in more than one way, right? So in your case, you may have had a combination of, sure, there may have been, and this is very common with strains, you have trigger points afterwards, the muscles retract and things like that, but you may have also had some issues with adhesion and scar tissue, for example, and the dry needling doesn't do as well for that stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. And they're super good, like I was saying before, those Thor 3 guys, because they understand that you're like type A personality. I'm here to get better and actually go back out and do my job, versus some of like the big army ones that they're dealing with are like people malingering, essentially. They're like, I don't want to work out. How do I get out of here? And these guys are like, when I was working with them, I was like, so I've got like a 50K in 2 weeks. I was like, can I do that? And he's like, I should tell you not to do it. He's like, but as long as it doesn't hurt when you run, you're not causing additional damage, and you don't. He's like, be very careful on the trail, because if you trip, right, you can further tear it or do something like that. He's like,
you sound very much so like patients in our office. Like this, you're mirroring conversations I have on a nearly daily basis.
So it was nice to get the kind of like a realistic assessment. Like here's what the baseline doctor recommendation is. Here's what your far right limit is. As far as what you can do before you start getting dangerous, and it's try to fall somewhere in between those two lines. So. It was nice.
You also bring up another good point there too, is that someone who's used to dealing with a specifically active population, right? So that's one of the differences you'll find in people who are accustomed to dealing with athletes in general too, is if you ask, can I do this? And you feel like you're getting a blanket no, there's a good chance you're dealing with someone who's not really well versed in dealing with either your type of athlete or athletes in general. There should be a logic behind any kind of alterations of activity, right? So, or it should be clear, like, and this is why if they say you shouldn't, it should be clear, like, oh, well, you could have an avulsion fracture of your ankle, and your ankle could dislocate. That'd be bad, so probably not, right? So that makes a lot of sense. It should be very logical, but if it doesn't seem like they have a good grasp on your status and your activity level in terms of, like, is it safe to do a certain activity with your injury, then that's a time you may want to make a change, in terms of if you're looking for a care provider to help you through your activity related injuries.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice there. Let's keep moving along. So we'll talk about kinesthesiology taping.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's run through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So KT tape is cool. I first got certified in 2010, and I'd resisted doing it for a couple of years prior because the '08 Olympics is really when people started asking the question, like, hey, what's up with that tape? But I resisted for a while because I was like, it has to be gimmicky. There's no way that stuff really works that well. But it was actually an intern in my office. I will have interns that come in from the chiropractic college in Kansas City. And there was an intern in my office, and he was actually, when he literally talked me into it, he was like, seriously, trust me, I swear, host a training at your practice, so on and so forth. So I was like, okay. So I hosted a training, got certified, and I was amazed at how it worked and the differences it can make. So the question that we frequently get is, okay, what is it and how does it work? I'll start with the simplest explanation, is that it's kind of like wearing a brace, but it doesn't restrict your range of motion, meaning it supports an area, but you have a full range of motion, right? So that's the simplest answer. But the reality is it's actually quite a bit more complicated than that. So all you're doing is taping. You have a tape that stretches in one direction. Because it stretches in one direction, a practitioner can kind of vector where forces go to and from, if that makes sense. So all you're doing is pulling on someone's skin. So how could that really help or support anything? And that's the neat thing, is that it works with the fascia, that connective tissue underneath your skin. Your muscles transmit a lot of their force through fascia. So by manipulating and pulling and pushing on fascia in different ways, you can really encourage or discourage certain motions to a surprising degree. And then it has a lot of benefits when it comes to pain relief too. And the way this works is that there are different types of nerve endings in your skin. And there are certain types of fiber that help you to accommodate to things. In other words, like if you put tape on your, like a Band-Aid on your skin, you kind of get used to it, things like that. So there are these fibers that they're called slow accommodating. So there's pressure on them over a long period of time, and they kind of dull out your sensation. Well, the neat thing is those nerves, as they go back to your spinal cord and they send their signals, they kind of are in competition with the pain, with the nerves that transmit pain, right? So think of it like cars merging on a highway, right? Well, the nerve that has the tape on it, the slow adapting fibers, they start putting more cars merging into that highway, which means you're getting less of the signals that are saying I'm in pain. So it literally is a natural way to reduce the amount of pain that you're experiencing in an area. And the neat thing about that is that, because you might say, oh, that's kind of neat and everything, but what does that do? Here's the amazing thing about your nervous system. If you move as if you're in less pain, you tend to be in less pain. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, like my shoulder hurt, and you get to that point, you're kind of anticipating it, right? But at this point where it doesn't hurt, the movement you're doing is the therapy. The pain-free movement you're doing is the therapy. So it is a way of providing therapy long after the doctor's or therapist's hands are no longer on your body.
Yeah, that was a absolutely great explanation. So similar to you, I went to the rock tape certification last year, and going in, I was like, I don't buy this stuff at all. I was like, they're gonna have to convince me. And they sat you down. They basically went through exactly what you just said, but in longer, and they were like bringing up the studies and showing the examples, and I was like, all right, I'm on board now. For for a $15 roll of tape, I mean, it does remarkable things, right? Like, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And then
surprising, I would say. I mean, even to this day, it's 9 years later. I'm still surprised at how well it works.
And then they also, so the Rock Tape also has a podcast that I haven't listened to in a while, but I used to listen to it. And they had they've taped like essentially dogs and horses.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about them, they were saying was, like the dog or the horse. I mean, they're not subjective to the placebo effect, right? They're just behaving the way they should behave. And they were saying when they taped the horses and the dogs, they changed their behavior afterwards, which was like pretty remarkable to hear.
Yeah, that is neat. There are some other treatments that have done similar things, and I feel like that's definitely like a litmus test right there. Because as you said, there is no placebo. There's no convincing them. They just they had something done or they got something on their body. They're not going to be thinking, oh yeah, that's going to make me better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you tape someone and you're like, did it make me better? Like, they don't want to be like, nah, it didn't do anything. Like sometimes they'll be like, yeah, it worked, I guess, and then so it's pretty cool to see. So we mentioned it at the beginning, crisis planning. So you go in and, I have a race in 3 days, but something's bothering me.
That's right.
I think, what kind of modalities would you provide there? Rock tape would be kinesiology tape would be the primary one, or
no? It would be the primary one. It would be the combination, and this it's impossible to answer like what exactly would be done because it's so variable. Yeah. Because again, I have to weigh out in my brain certain things can make you really sore. For example, trigger point dry needling can make you very sore initially. So if your event's tomorrow, that even though that might be the very best option for you, that may not be the best thing to do. So I may have to do either another type of dry needling, or I may have to do some of the other modalities. So the timing to the event makes a difference. The nature of the event, the structure that's hurt compared to what you'll be using, those are all factors I have to weigh in to figure out what is the combination of things that we're going to pull from that'll get the biggest results for you in the time frame that you're asking me. So again, I'm not thinking of next week, except of course I'm not going to recommend if I think there's going to be catastrophic damage or something. But as long as it's something that we can get through safely, then what I'm thinking of is your event is Saturday. What can I do that's going to create the biggest impact between now and Saturday after your event? And that's my whole rationale behind that. I actually I stopped working with the T-Bones this year. I worked with them for 10 seasons. But when I worked with them, that's the mode I constantly was in. So I was there before a game. And so, it's a lot of pitchers come up, they say, it hurts when I do this, right? So I'm not thinking of, and here's the exercise you need to do. Here's this and that. It's okay. Let me feel that motion. Okay. This is restricted. Let me loosen that up. That feels better. Okay. Now this feels like this. Let me put some tape on here to restrict that motion. Okay. That feels like it's better. You're going to be fine for tonight.
Awesome. And I think what you're saying is resonating well with the OCR community, because we have the tendency to like get injured and then just kind of push through it. Be like, no, I can definitely do this 26-mile mountain course on Saturday, even though my leg hurts. So I think that's really valuable. Now you're located specifically in the Kansas City area.
That's right.
Now, so kind of before we move on to the wider world, but like where specifically is your facility in Kansas City?
So we're in Olathe, which is in Johnson County. It's south of the actual Kansas City proper. And we are just off of Highway 35, so I-35. So we're right near a big hospital called Olathe Medical Center. So we're not attached onto it, but if you ever can find Olathe Medical Center, then you know where we're at. We're basically across the street from it.
Cool. So that's good info if you're in the KC OCR group, the online Facebook group of the Kansas City Obstacle Course Racers. Good info for that. But the rest of the audience, spread out all across the country, how do I find someone like you? Because the answers you're giving me now are the answers, I want to hear and the type of person I want to be working with, if I live in New York or Washington or et cetera. How do I find someone like you?
So going on to some of the websites of the very things that you and I have talked about tonight are the easiest way to do it. Very often, I actually, if it's someone calling in saying, find someone for my mom, I'll actually give them the Active Release website. And the reason why is that Active Release is very good and everything. I use other treatments. It's not like the only thing I do. I don't instruct for them. I'm not paid by them or anything like that. But the reality is this. Active Release, it's expensive to get certified in. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. And then every year it's an expensive recertification. So long story short, people who usually are actively certified, they are in it. They are literally invested in improving and keeping themselves at the top of their game. And when I go to ART seminars, I've been to many seminars from many different types of healthcare providers and many different organizations. And when I go to an ART seminar, I mean, it's rare, if ever, that there is a single person in the entire large group that I wouldn't send my parents to. You know, they tend to be really good. So my point is, even if ART isn't the thing that you need, then it's a good starting point for finding someone who's going to be good at what they do. Beyond that, you can go to activerelease.com, so activerelease.com, and it has a find a provider function on there, and you can just type in where you're at and look up somebody near you. And then what you can do is check out their individual websites. Let's say there's 3-5 people near you, and let's say that you're super interested in KT taping and dry needling. Then you might find on somebody's website, just on mine, like that's one of the treatments offered, right? So you go to treatments offered on their website and you see those things that you want, and that's how you can choose. But other than that, if you mentioned Rock Tape. Rock Tape is a great organization. You can go to Rock Tape. I imagine they probably have a certified provider function on there, or something like that, or any of the other treatments that we've mentioned.
Awesome. Another very good answer. So where can people specifically find you and your company for, getting in contact with you for professional help?
So our website is kchealthandsport.com. So kchealthandsport.com, all spelled out. That's our website. And then the name of it is Advanced Healthcare and Sports Injury. Or if you want to make it easier, I think I'm the only me in the country in terms of my name. I don't think there's a single other Kirk Iodice in the entire country. So if you just look up Kirk, K-I-R-K, last name is Iodice, I-O-D-I-C-E, that's going to be a pretty easy way to find me.
Cool. And can people contact your personal page online for questions? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've had the pleasure of, I taught the chiropractic college for 9 years. I've been involved with helping with different organizations, things like that. So we get questions, emails from people all the time. I have an internship program that we do through the chiropractic college locally. We frequently have people. So long story short, we're very used to people, contacting us, questions, things like that. The reality is that as the healthcare provider, just like with what you do, you're not getting paid for every single thing you do, right? It's because you love it. It's your passion. It's because what you believe in, right? Absolutely. So the same thing as a healthcare provider is that I feel like I'm still helping people. So I've been to many races where I would do ART on people after a race, and I do a good treatment with them. And most people are my patients, and I appreciate that, and it's awesome. But ultimately, if you tell me you're never going to be my patient, I'm still going to give you a really great treatment. And I work on people at those events frequently who I know I'll never see again. They live in Austin or something like that. And the crazy thing is, I'll get emails from those people, a month later, and because I will tell them, okay, this is what's wrong with you. Here's how you go about the same questions we're answering here. Here's how you find someone who can help you. And I'll get a thank you email from those people. And they're just like, thank you so much. I was dealing with this for so long. I followed your advice. I got this person. And they treated me. So even though I didn't do the hands-on work, it may not have happened if I hadn't met them, or at least it wouldn't happen that time frame. So for me, it's kind of that selfishly unselfish type thing that I still feel great about being able to help people, even if it's not going to necessarily result in someone being another patient in my practice.
Awesome. Another good answer. And we'll, tag you when this post goes up on Facebook and on our website, we'll have links to the website and your Facebook page and stuff like that. So
great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Easy contact method there. All right. I think that kind of wraps things up. Before we go, any final things you want to share with the wider OCR community?
I think that there is a tremendous benefit in finding people who can treat things in the way that I do. And I don't mean that for me. If you would rather not see me than see someone who does something similar, but people who treat in a similar method. I'll tell you, Evan, one of the things I hear the most, and it used to make me feel really good, but now it's kind of a frustrating thing I hear all the time, which is, I wish I'd found you sooner, which makes you feel good as a practitioner. But I hate that was the case. I hate that generally speaking, when people were saying that, it took a long time. They had to try a bunch of other stuff or do other things. So my simple advice would be, find someone who does a similar spectrum of treatments like this, and kind of keep them in your back pocket, because these treatments, what they're best at is getting fast results and helping to release tight or injured things. And then often people like me will also have be a good starting point for other providers. Like there are times where I refer directly to physical therapy, and specific times where I say, listen, I'm not the best person for you. This person will be. So the take-home message would be, find someone who's decent. You can utilize this as a template for some of the different treatments that can be really beneficial for OCR athletes. And I wish you the best. And if you guys need to contact me, or if I'm sure Evan can answer some of the questions too, but if you want to contact me or my office directly, I'm happy to field any questions anybody has.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Before we let you go, any final shout outs you want to give, friends, family, etc., coworkers, whatever?
I am grateful every day for working with an incredible team of people, and they're part of the magic sauce that is our practice. One of our goals is an outstanding customer experience, an outstanding patient experience. So from the time people walk through the door, and I'm only a part of that, so it takes other people in there too. So I'm grateful for that, and I would just simply just give a word of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for having me on, and potentially giving some information that maybe someone out there could be helped by.
Awesome. And if you're listening to this podcast and as a couple months have gone by and you're having trouble finding some of the links, on the CTG Protein website, we have a recovery section under one of the drop-down tabs. I think it's under training, and Kirk's practice is listed under there too. So you guys can check that out, ctgprotein.com. Cool. Well, again, thanks for coming on. I thought the podcast was super interesting. I'm kind of nerdy like that. So I know some of my friends are in the same boat. So I'm pretty sure there's a good amount of people who at least enjoyed this and learned something new from this. So thanks again. And we'll definitely be in contact again. We'll try to do some other things with your practice in the future to kind of spread the word and spread the exposure of all the different services you provide.
I really appreciate it. And if you get any feedback too of specific things that people want to hear about, I'm happy to work in that kind of a format too. Like,
cool. Yeah.
What's the best, Achilles injuries, whatever it is, something very, very targeted and specific. I try to keep a little itinerary in my brain about some of the most important key points about some of those things. So if that ever pops up or that becomes relevant, I'm happy to work in that format too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a good idea. We've had Luke Labonte, our nutritionist, that we bring on the podcast regularly. We've had him on a couple different times, and I think the last one or two times we've had him on, we did like a Q&A. We posted it online ahead of time. People posted all their questions, and then we picked we typically don't have time to run through all of them, but we pick a handful and kind of run through them on the podcast, and it tends to hit, people tend to have a lot of the same questions. Oh, my knee bothering, my ankle's bothering me, et cetera. So yeah. That sounds great. We'll look into that and definitely bring you back on in the future.
That sounds awesome. I'd love to. Anytime, Evan.
All right. We'll catch you later. And for those of you listening, we just got another resupply in of Bleg mitts, our neoprene mittens. So we should have enough for anyone that wants them for World's Toughest Mudder or any of the other big races coming up. And other than that, teamstrengthspeed.com, online stores where you can order those. All my books are also available on there, and they're all links for digital copies of the book. So if you're more of a digital person, that option is now available. And we got some other news coming down the pipe later, but I will save that, and we will see you next week on the podcast. All right, Kirk, thanks again for coming on.
Bye. Thanks again, Evan.